good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, depending on your time zone. And we are just starting with the next TEG talk, the Entrepreneurship Gyan talk, and it's the first one for 2024. And actually, with Professor Anirudh, I wanted to do sometime last year, but unfortunately, he was also occupied in some of those things, and then I got occupied in some other things, and then just this year I wanted to give it a nice kickstart for the year, and that's why I actually waited for January, so that because he was not available in January, to start actually in February. And I think most of you would have already seen his profile and maybe gone through some of his works, and that's why you have decided to join this particular session. So just let me give a brief, very brief introduction about TEG, although you all might not already be knowing it, and you must have registered after reading about it. So this is a startup and entrepreneurship special interest group of IT Bombay Alumni Association, and one of our previous board members, was already leading it. And when I joined, I decided to take forward and lead this particular special interest group. So Praveen Mallaji, who was already taking care of all those SIGs, special interest group, this particular SIG was also taken care of by him at that point of time. And I started leading it from sometime next year. And then I came forward with this initiative. Why don't we start this particular series of talks where we can invite people like as we have speakers in the past, Ramananji or Kamal Rekiji, or we have today Professor Andrit with us, and we have a good mix of, as I call it, paper and practice and policy. Basically, we can invite people who are successful entrepreneurs, but also who are in leaders in the corporate world, and academics like Professor Andrit we have today, and have a good mix of discussions and kind of talks on these particular topics, which are very relevant these days, especially entrepreneurship, policy around entrepreneurship, and stuff like that. And for thinking in this perspective, we started this initiative sometime last year. I think in June or somewhere around that, we had our first talk. In last year itself, we had 8 talks, and this is the ninth talk and the first one for 2024. And the idea is still the same that we had in last year, to create this platform for collaboration, for learning, for new entrepreneurs, but also for someone who is interested. So yeah, young entrepreneurs is one thing, but also people can become entrepreneur at any age, and that is what we have been discussing, or we have been seeing in different talks in from the past 8 talks that we had. And still, the idea is that to create this particular platform where people can collaborate, people can learn, people can share stuff, people can explore synergies. And going forward, we will also be coming up with an actual platform, or kind of match between people who can mentor and who can basically be mentees somewhere down the line, and also have a larger event possibly sometime this year. So that's the kind of broad idea that we had in mind. And I won't take much time. I would invite co-host and my friend Venu to formally introduce the speaker, and we can move ahead from there. So Venu, to you.
Thanks a lot, Vaibhav. I think a very well put forward introduction where I want to just, highlight the 3 points that you made a mention of: the paper, practice, and policy that are very key in terms of what we have seen from our speakers. This has been a sort of fabulous start, and I think having Professor Anirudh here with us is a delight. One, because I think it's a great way to start the year, and even the topic of making the world your oyster with 2024 say just begun, and a lot of people having that enthusiasm to put in New Year resolutions. Hopefully people will also consider and get inspired by today's session to come up with new resolutions, especially as we brought together a professor of marketing here. So definitely, I think a great start for that, for the series as well as for people. So I think just to quickly introduce our speaker for the day, we have Professor Anirudh Tiwar with us. He's a professor of marketing at Babson College. Prior to joining the faculty at Babson College, Anirudh was a faculty at the Harvard Business School and the Sloan School of Management at MIT. He has served on the board of multiple companies, and he's been on the board audit and technology committees of Molex Incorporated. He is an inveterate student of the dynamic interplay between science and technology-intensive enterprises, the enterprise's customers, the ecosystems in which the enterprise play, and the overall social milieu in which the dynamics are set. a highly experienced and effective management thinker, educator, and facilitator. He is committed to integrating the innovation, discernment, and renaissance perspectives to the practice of management, all supported by the analytical rigor and fearless love of the question. So I think we definitely expect to have a lot of questions from people, which we will keep picking between the hosts. We'll try to answer those towards the end, but please ensure the enthusiasm is on because we have an expert who is equally enthusiastic to answer those questions. Professor Anirudh's research, teaching, and consulting focus on technology, product, pricing, marketing, and business strategy in the computer, consumer electronics, life science, media, and financial services industries is definitely something that we would love to learn a lot about, given the importance and a lot of wide coverage in terms of expertise that he has. As a part of the Babson Executive Educator faculty, Anirudh has served as faculty on custom programs for Siemens, IBM, FLIR, Ericsson, Merck Life Sciences, Novartis, Santander, McGraw-Hill Education, and multiple other well-known brands and names out there. So independent to Professor Anirudh's past and present executive development are his experiences consulting clients such as Molex, Stratasys, JP Morgan Chase, The Weather Channel, and multiple other companies. He's a recipient of Babson's Thomas Kennedy Award for teaching excellence at the graduate level for 3 consecutive years between 2002 to 2005. And one of the most important aspects and very close to heart, he is our dear alumni from the BTech in Electrical Engineering batch of 73 at IIT Bombay, post which he's done his management MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and a PhD in engineering and economic systems from Stanford University. So we are very happy to have you here as the first speaker for our session, Anirudh. So I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Venu, and thank you, Vaibhav, for the introductions. I hope you can all hear me. And Venu, and I appreciate the introduction, but more than anything else, I just want to stress that I'm a human being. Everything else is not the point. It's I'm a human being, and like all human beings, we have our strengths and our weaknesses. We have things that give us joy, and we have things that keep us awake at night. But like everybody else, I'm a human being. I don't tend to profess anything. That's not my expertise, if you will. All I try and do is get people to think about things with questions, questions, and questions. So let me open up a presentation.
Yes, please.
And I hope everybody can see it. Is it okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good.
Perfect. Yeah.
Thank you. So yes, Venu, I am a graduate of IIT Bombay. I still cannot call it Mumbai, and I guess officially it's still called IIT B and not IIT M. So I Bombay, and we graduated in 1973, and indeed my class had its 50th reunion earlier this week, for which I was not able to be present. And one of the things that makes me really nervous right now is not all the rest of you attending, but some of my fellow classmates from IIT 1973 attending, and then deciding perhaps I was a complete idiot or otherwise. So that's what makes me nervous. People I know from 50 years ago who are now listening in. IIT Bombay, Hostel 3, and a few years ago, I took my kids to Hostel 3, and I still remember with some fond memories all the bull sessions we used to have then. And in some sense, this is a part of those bull sessions, if you will. So I'm not here to tell you things. I'm here to hopefully get you to question things, and maybe the answers will be discovered in the next hour and a half or so, maybe 5 years from now. That's fine. But let's just make this a session, if you will, to germinate questions which can result in some interesting answers. So the topic for this session is something that I've been focused on for a while, because in some sense, each and every one of us, I guess, is looking for a pearl. And our pearls might be different, but it's the oyster that has the pearl that we are seeking. And that adventure is our journey. So kind of let's approach it in a spirit, and making the world your oyster is not just the geographical world out there, but also the mental world that is within us. How do we make the world our oyster as we look for our pearl? along the way with some significant discipline. So I've been told that essentially for the first half of the session, 45 minutes or so, I'm going to share a presentation, and then we can just discuss questions that arise and perhaps answers I have, or maybe some of you have. Let me begin with a disclaimer. There is an old saw that some of you might have heard. Those who can do, those who can't teach. So unlike many of you are entrepreneurs, I did not do. All I do is teach. So I cannot do, so therefore I'm teaching. And there's an extension to the saw. And those who can't teach consult. So I'm not that either. So I'm in the middle, if you will. So I've not started my own enterprise, but maybe the life we have is our enterprise. So that is, I'm going to share with you what I have discovered in the journey. Okay, so first and foremost, something about me. And the title for this slide is intentional. Consiliences, and I read a book 20 years ago almost by someone named E.O. Wilson, an entomologist at Harvard, titled Consilience, the Unity of Human Knowledge. And I think my interests, my intrigues, my passion, what keeps me up at night, that delight me, is about intersections, consiliences, perhaps the intersection of science, technology, and business, perhaps marketing and technology, perhaps the pricing of products which everybody wants for free, content. How do you make money thereof? But more so, and I believe in a world where there is significant disruptive change all the time. And how do we transform our enterprises so we thrive in the midst of the disruptive change? Also, from my electrical engineering legacy and days, there's an interest in system dynamics in business, society, and environment. And I remember still from 1969, 1970, there was this course called Applied Mechanics. And many may not remember this, but also electrical engineering, there were these differential equations. And the question was whether the poles or zeros lay in the left half plane or the right half plane, and what causes system stability or otherwise. And there, my current passion is around what I call four singularities. What's going on with artificial intelligence, okay, and perhaps the intersection of human intelligence with artificial intelligence, and what happens after the event horizon is crossed. What's going on with respect to experimentation right now with respect to our genes, not GEN, but GENE, our genes, and how that can change the path of evolution. Third, climate change and the significant disruptions that might await us. And personally, for me right now, a burning question is what social media might do to the stability of societies and the functioning, governing of societies. This is where you could get significant lack of stability or instability in systems. And what do we do? Every week, I have a newsletter and roundtable on science, technology, business, and society. So one word, consilience, at the intersection. So if you want to find pearls, look not in your own domains, but thrive and frequent domains completely remote from your own. Babson College is where I am. I'm on the faculty, but I don't teach. I go on saying to my fellow co-learners, not students, my fellow co-learners, that all I do is facilitate learning. We learn together, the students and I, so we facilitate learning. Babson prides itself in the rankings, #1 in undergraduate education for 27 consecutive years. And I don't know how we pulled it off, but 10th in the United States, 10th best college ranked by the Wall Street Journal. So that's great. Okay. But I think more to the point, we live in a world which is volatile. We live in a world that is uncertain. We live in a world that is highly complex, a world that is ambiguous, and a world that is hyperconnected, a VUCA world. How do we learn to thrive in such a world? Not through theories, but in practice. So what we do create is a better world around us. That's Babson College. So the agenda for the session we have today is, first of all, 4 words: resilience, iteration, perseverance, ingenuity. All of which I hope all of us in this session truly embrace. But more to the point, what are some possible loci of entrepreneurial inspiration? And what do you draw on, and how do you create a really rich Venn diagram intersection set across the 4 possible loci? what you believe and what I believe you should be doing, and all of us should be doing to find that right pearl, in quotation marks, because my right might be very different from your right. Okay. I have this concept of a formula of enterprise I will share with you, and I will stress how continuing success requires acting with discipline, but also minding the gaps. And finally, the game is often about growing, but more so evolving and transforming. So that's the agenda. Six parts, maybe just a couple of slides in each at most, but hopefully seeds that will plant in your minds for questions, for germination, and for somehow over time rich product coming out of it. So I don't know if you heard of someone named Seth Godin, Sethgodin. Every day he has a little blog that he sends via email message. This blog came to my inbox now almost 2 years ago, and I want to make sure that we understand the import of this blog. So the title is, he had the title Possibility is Fragile, to which I would extend the entrepreneurial possibility is fragile. So let's very off the start acknowledge one simple fact. That is a fragile possibility. And that's the paradox. Because the closer possibility gets to reality, and I'm sure each of you, a budding entrepreneur or an existing entrepreneur, can attest, the closer possibility gets to reality, the more it engages with the unforgiving edges of the real world. That's the challenge, the unforgiving edges of the real world. And we cannot let ourselves be weighed down by that. And we begin to imagine something better. It's important to have some insulation. Now, each word here is important, insulation. How does each of us create, if you will, some insulation so we will be okay? Room to believe. We need that room to believe and a chance to fill in the missing pieces. We don't always get the chance the first time around, sometimes not the second time around, but we need a chance to fill in the missing pieces and the room to believe in what we believe. Many of you are too young, but at least some of the attendees whose name I recognize, and I remember from the 60s and 70s, etc., there was this John Lennon song called Imagine. Okay, and I can already hear the rhythm playing in my mind. But room to believe, to room to imagine, and the insulation to protect us. But then we have to allow for the constraints of reality to intersect with our beautiful new conception. In other words, welcome to the real world. Okay, and when that happens, it's easy for all our imaginings to simply evaporate. Now comes the important paragraph. But fragile doesn't mean impossible. Possibility looms around every corner if willing to bring resilience and iteration to the dance as well. So if you want to remember few words from this slide, those are the words: resilience and iteration to the dance. If you want to find that oyster with a pearl inside, you will need that phrase, resilience and iteration to the dance. Yes, it might not work, but deciding that in advance undermines the value of the gift we intend to bring to people. And my hope is that as entrepreneurs, that's what drives us. Not the money we will make necessarily, but the gift we intend to bring to people. So with that as a backdrop, okay, this past Tuesday, I heard a fascinating podcast on this, what as an engineer in me really got me excited. Okay, there's this little 4-pound helicopter, 4 pounds, which is less than 2 kilos. Helicopter, human-made, that flew for not 1 month, which was the intended life, but 3 years over the surface of Mars. We made it, we got it there, and it flew. That to me is the entrepreneurial venture. Okay, and therefore the 2 words from this slide, the rover on which the helicopter went is called perseverance. And the helicopter itself is called ingenuity. How do we as entrepreneurs bring that perseverance to bear and the ingenuity for the success of our ventures? There's this children's little book called The Little Engine That Could. I don't know if any of you heard of it. The Little Engine That Could. This was the little helicopter that could. And your entrepreneur venture, if you will, is the little enterprise that could. And approach it with the spirit of perseverance and ingenuity. So 4 words: resilience, iteration, perseverance, and ingenuity that you bring to the dance. So next game, of course, all that is fine, but it's about opportunities. That's what entrepreneurs do best, if you will. What others see as boredom, entrepreneurs see as opportunities. And I think I would talk about essentially focus on the three S's of opportunities: seeking, seeing, and seizing. Seeking, seeing, and seizing. Okay, and maybe it's because I'm from India, but brought together with mindfulness, intentionality, and discipline. If and this is a central slide you can keep in the front of your mind day after day after day. The game is about opportunities, and I am responsible. I owe it to myself to be always seeking, and then in the course of seeking, if I see something separating the signal to the noise, as an electrical engineer, I still understand signal to noise ratio. Okay, separate the noise from the signals and see. And I think many of us see, but as Sherlock Holmes had once said, but we don't observe. And I think we should be observing opportunities. And finally, having the courage to seize them with mindfulness, intentionality, and discipline. Now, Venu talked about marketing. So now let me bring my marketing hat on, because one of the things that I do not, I think engineers should learn. It's not about your science. It's not about your technology. It's not about your gadget. It's about the problem you solve for the customer. Okay? Never, ever, ever mistake pride in what you create with the solution of a real problem. So opportunities, the recording has stopped. I don't quite know I got that message, but the opportunities, if you will, are not products or services we sell, but the real problems of customers that we solve in a distinctive and compelling way. Solving real problems of customers. So it's not about the pride of the little gadget we created. I'm sure that is genius work, but that's not the point. The point here is truly empathize with, internalize, and then proceed to solve that problem in a way that is distinctive, that makes you stand apart from others, but also compelling in the sense the customer says, I must have that solution. So you all are entrepreneurs, okay? And I think your inspiration for entrepreneurial venture comes not just from the opportunities you seek and find, but also the fact that there are maybe gaps you observe in markets and ecosystem. Gaps that others did not see, but you observe. Okay, and that might require some creative reframing, but gaps. Alternatively, it might also be from some new science or engineering or technology that is developed, that you see in the corridors of IITs or something. And you say, look, there's a possible solution to a problem. So let me try and marry the gap that exists with a solution that is available. There might also be changes, and India has seen many of that, for example, but everywhere in the world, there are changes all the time in policies, regulations, standards, etc. That is a possible source of entrepreneurial inspiration. And finally, your own passion. To me, doing any one of these bullets only by itself is not necessarily a sustainable game. But if you can create a Venn diagram that is exciting for you as well as for the world, now you've got something going as a starting point. But that has to be informed by the opportunities. So we are on the way for the next part of my formula, which is finding the right pearl. And I'm, since I have had my 50th reunion, if you will, and when what struck me and what struck me, for the first time ever in my life, I heard two people separately call me Anirudh Ji. Okay, that I've never heard that before. First thing I realized that I'm old. Okay, nobody says G unless you have reached a certain age. Okay, so that was kind of shameful in some sense. Okay, oops, I'm sorry, I'm that old already. So people call me G. But the point here is maybe you need the 50 years to get some perspective. And I think for me, I've observed many enterprises, many entrepreneurs year in, year out. And I think the first thing you require if you want to find the right pearl is to develop a fisheye lens. A fish can see way out there. Most people don't have fisheye lenses. And I think if you want to find the right pearl, develop a fisheye lens. Also, a periscopic vision. We all tend to focus on better telescopes. What we need are better periscopes to look around corners. So, wider perspectives and the excitement and the uncertainty and perhaps the fear of looking around corners. That is the starting point for finding the right pearl. When I was a graduate student at Stanford, I was bored with the method for some time and I took a course in photography. And the instructor in 1983, I've never forgotten, 41 years later, gave me one advice in last class, which I think has always stayed with me. Don't take a photograph standing up. The first thing, I'm sure all of you are thinking, what the heck is he talking about? Well, very simple. Most people take photographs standing up. If you want to be a successful entrepreneur, I think the starting point here is change perspectives. You get on a chair, squat on the floor, take a photograph. It now is composed differently than everybody else's photographs. So that is a critical ingredient of finding the right pearl. And we all suffer from flatlands of our own. I remember in IIT reading a book called Flatland. It was 50 years ago. Okay, but we all suffer from flatlands of our own. And I think the point here is not to be embarrassed about what others might think. In India, there's a lot of that I've heard. Okay, what will your relatives say, uncles say, aunts say, everybody say? Well, forget what other people might think. Okay, the point here is what you believe might be the pearl and go after it. And there was a German poet, Satya Nadella, I'm sure you all heard of. When he became CEO, the first email message he wrote to his employees at Microsoft, the first email message, February 2014, he quoted Oscar Wilde. Now, not that many CEOs, especially technology company CEOs, can quote Oscar Wilde. He also quoted Rilke, a poet. Okay, in that sense, Satya Nadella is incredible. But Rilke, the German poet, has this concept: do not seek the comfort of answers. Instead, okay, squirm in the discomfort of questions. That is a necessary ingredient for looking for your pearl. Okay. The word enterprise is something I use often. I do not like the word company. I do not like the word organization, because those are kind of too static. Okay. Enterprise, if you look at the dictionary, okay, it's about an undertaking, which I'm sure all of you are doing as entrepreneurs. That is especially difficult, complicated, or risky. It's the boldness of your move and the momentous character of it all that really adds both excitement, but also the right degree of fear. Okay, that with resilience and iteration, perseverance and ingenuity, you can make something out of. Now, it's all okay to dream, and you can dream as big as you want, but now discipline starts coming in. Be methodical with your steps. One step at a time is how success is built, not just with dreams. And finally, as engineers, many of us might be, if you're especially in IIT, the skill lies in hypotheses. Start with the right hypotheses and experiment. You get some consequences. But as I've often heard people say, if the map and the territory don't exist, the territory is never wrong. The map is wrong. So similarly, if your results of your experiments don't agree with your hypothesis, as engineers, we learn that the results are not wrong. It's the hypothesis that is wrong. And I think that's a very humbling thing for all entrepreneurs, business people, and leaders. And so that's kind of the starting point, if you will, as you seek the pearl, as you make the world your oyster. So a few years ago, I had nothing better to do, so I had my bull session with myself, since all my IT friends were not there, and I came up with this formula for enterprise. So this is not Maxwell's equation. This is not Schrodinger's relationship. This is not Einstein. It's simple, okay? But enterprise, that risky, bold, momentous undertaking, ideally for me, is a combination of multiple variables. starting with your what has been often called, and I hope I'm forgiven if I'm a bit impolite. There's a four-letter acronym some of you might have heard of, BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. Big, hairy, audacious goal. Okay, your aspiration. What is the aspiration that is driving your enterprise? And I think that needs to be clearly understood and internalized, not as wordsmithed by a PR firm or a marketing firm, but that you deeply believe. Okay, as a starting point, what is the aspiration? But that has to be a shared intentionality, not just a sentence, but a shared intentionality that drives us forward. And we need innovativeness in terms of always questioning the status quo. Always questioning the status quo. That makes others uncomfortable. I understand that. So be respectful and yet question the status quo. And innovation is not just about products, not just about technology. Innovation is changing through questioning what we do and how we do things. Also be entrepreneurial, which I'm sure all of you are being, in terms of being resourceful. One way I can tell the difference between managers of boring old enterprises and entrepreneurs is the former complain about the lack of resources. They're always whining. We don't have this, we don't have that, we don't have that. On the other hand, true entrepreneurs are resourceful. So instead of complaining about what they don't have, they are resourceful in what they can find and work with. But everything is a house of cards unless there is discipline, discipline, discipline. And finally, something that I deeply believe, so these are my values, not necessarily shared by all entrepreneurs. Okay, do all this not just to make money, but with a deep sense of stewardship for the resources that you have inherited, and you're going to leave the world with a better balance sheet than you started. So this is my little formula, and I think the entrepreneurs who I have seen and admired and respected is because they are some of these critical elements of formula in their ventures. So the first discipline, and this is from a case study I did with a group in Bogota, Colombia, named Grupo Sala. Now, I won't tell you a lot about this except for the following. What they do is three things, okay? Collect garbage. I mean garbage, okay? And what we have at home and what we have on the streets, etc. They collect garbage. They also get rid of hazardous waste, for example, blood, bones, okay, etc. in hospitals, okay, hazardous waste. And they help with water and sanitation. Now, for most of us, this might be boring. Okay, but this entrepreneur, Humberto Rodriguez, I met in 2014 now for the first time, 10 years ago. He started this venture in the late 1990s. Okay, and until 2014, when I wrote the case, over 12 years, okay, his enterprise, Grupo Sala, grew at 21% compound annual rate. Now that is not bad. Okay, and I think many entrepreneurs would give a lot to get that kind of growth rate. But he has this 5-part formula he shared with me on being an effective entrepreneur. First and foremost, people outside the US may not relate this to this very well, but and I did not until one of my sons started playing baseball. But now I can relate to this. Humberto Rodriguez loved baseball, and he said, "There's an observation I have to share with you in baseball. I had a strict father who never allowed me to make mistakes. I had a strict principal in school who never allowed me to make mistakes. But that's why I loved baseball, because there I could make mistakes." And I think this last summer, my son was playing baseball, and in the first inning, he is a pitcher, and he gave up multiple runs, and he was taken out. Most of us will be ashamed, embarrassed, and let down if we are taken out in the first inning after you give up runs. I think in baseball, you discover that next inning is a new inning, and you can start again. And I think that is a critical part of being an effective entrepreneur. Dust your knees, walk up, stand up, and start walking again. Never ever take no for an answer unless there is some good reason you can discern behind the no. So you always have a second chance. Second, that's That's fine, but you need to have deep, deep, deep market knowledge. It's not the technology you're offering, it's a problem you are solving. And the market has to be ready or made ready to solve that problem. You may or may not have heard of this, but there was a person named Professor Melvin Kranzberg from the Georgia Institute of Technology, who in the 1960s, so many years ago, wrote 6 laws of technology. The first law I want to share with you was the following. Technology is neither good nor bad, semicolon, nor is it neutral. I think it is the role of entrepreneurs to turn what might be neutral into good and not bad. But there's a second law of technology is going to intrigue you. I'm going to say this very carefully and see what you just heard, okay? And the law is invention is the mother of necessity. I think, did you hear me right? Invention is the mother of necessity. As entrepreneurs, if you have deep market knowledge, you can turn that invention as the mother of necessity that people want. Now you can get the right multipliers in place. Third thing you must have is a stellar, credible reputation. It's a reputation that'll help others have confidence in you, and you need that reputation. So somehow do not be sloppy, especially when it comes to what you say and what you do. Okay, fourth, build a network of relationships, not just because of what they can get for you, but maybe what you might give to them. And maybe start with what you can do for them, and maybe in the future, there'll be some IOUs you can cash in on. And finally, fifth, you need people to tell you some honest truths. You are full of it. You're full of it. You're full of it. Okay. You need people who will tell you the honest truth, advice that you may not want to hear, but nevertheless is in your best interest. So that is discipline number one. Second discipline, and I shared this presentation earlier with Vaibhav, and he wrote back to me saying, I was wondering when somebody will get to Gary Hamel. Okay, so here you are. Okay, there's a strategist named Gary Hamel. He wrote a book many years ago now called Leading the Revolution. The revolutionary company he had in mind was Enron, which of course did bad things, so we won't go there. But this little framework, okay, from this whole presentation, you take away this slide, that's all you do, okay, then maybe your 45 minutes or 1.5 hours would not have been ill spent. Okay? You are the architect of your enterprise. You have to put all the building blocks in place as you build this architecture. Okay, you have to focus on what is our core strategy, starting with why do we exist? What fundamental difference do we make to our customers' lives or businesses, B2C or B2B, because our enterprise exists? I think that clarity of the raison d'etre can stand you well in the wake of many, many challenges. We need to have a clear sense of the raison d'etre. And then that translates into things like how are we different, what do we offer, but that core strategy. There's also the customer interface, because you don't succeed unless you can actually deliver, not through a broken, but a really good, sound customer interface. None of this will happen unless you configure the right set of strategic resources. And at the end of the day, you cannot do everything yourself. Just acknowledge that. You cannot do everything yourselves, and therefore, where do the boundaries between what you do and what a larger value network does? These are 4 starting building blocks for any enterprise. Technology, non-technology, large, small, old, young, doesn't matter. 4 building blocks, okay? Not that many bullets, okay? But do that architecture with 2 goals in mind. First and foremost, make it sound architecture so it doesn't fall apart. Think about the efficiencies you build in. Think about the fit you build into your enterprise. At the same time, make it attractive architecture. Make it unique. And for heaven's sake, build in mechanisms so that you get more than average profits. Do it well, do it all together. And there are 4 types of profit boosters the slide talks about: strategic economies, strategic flexibilities, competitor lockouts, and increasing returns. Okay, build them into your enterprise. Now, some of them are mutually exclusive. So, for example, you cannot get both economy of scope and focus, fair enough. Okay, but know what you're up to and be an intentional architect and not just an accidental architect. Okay, there's a feng shui principles, if you will. Bring those feng shui principle counterparts into your enterprise architecture. And so don't just be a resident, don't just be an occupier, be an active, engaged architect. That matters. Okay. And if you have questions, we can go, but I can spend days on this little framework. But I just want to put some of the building blocks in place. And for me, the big emphasis here is on the raison d'etre. The big emphasis is on insight. There is often in class, I talked about, you could have data on customers. You can have information about customers. You can have insight into customers. Data on, easy. Information about, Excel spreadsheets. Insight into, requiring true insight into behavior. And if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, I believe you need not data alone, not information alone, but deep insights. So that's the first box. Okay, raison d'etre, insights. Strategic resources. Culture is what you want to build. Except, and this is the aha, culture is not an independent variable. Culture is a dependent variable. It is a function of the competencies you build, the assets you work with, and build over time, the systems and processes you deploy, and the structure you have. You cannot change culture by waving a wand. You change the culture by working on competencies, what you're good at, assets, what you have to work with, processes, how you do things, systems, how you measure how you're doing, structure, how you organize. These are the variables you play with as you, the architect enterprise, can craft something amazing. And then finally, in the value network box, okay, the thing that I have realized over time that really matters is how do we align with ourselves with, or perhaps emerge as the keystone players in the ecosystems in which we play. The keystone players in the ecosystem, we're talking about architecture, or any bridge, there's a keystone in the middle. You want to be the keystone player, or you want to be aligned with the keystone player. So this, for me, is the great part of discipline, being the architect of the enterprise. And some of this architecture might work out well, some of this might not. So welcome to the London Tube system. Every time you're in London's tube system, a station approaches, you hear, mind the gap, mind the gap, mind the gap. If you want to be a successful leader of your enterprise, okay, not only are you architecting the enterprise, at the same time, you're also minding the gaps in the enterprise. And there could be many gaps. You have to learn to prioritize and then address them, okay, without, and then, I'm sure you heard this expression, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. And let me give you an addition. Don't let the good become the enemy of the acceptable. So perfect, good, and acceptable. Sometimes we have to work with acceptable. We can't get to perfect, but nevertheless, the gaps that exist that we need to be careful and mindful about closing. And that requires discipline. That often means sometimes saying no. Okay. And that's not easy to say no. It's easier to say yes than to say no. But as the old expression goes in strategy, it's about deciding what does not go on your plate, not what goes on your plate, but deciding what does not go on your plate. And then, okay, this is never a stationary game. The game is about, at the very least, growth. But one of the things I've been thinking about the last few years is the world going to be ready, or might the world have to be ready for a new metaphor saying we can't afford to have all the growth we have. Okay, maybe it's the growth and the pursuit of growth that has gotten into some of the tight corners we are in. So growth, yes, all of us want, and that's what markets measure. I get that. Okay, I'm not naive. But sometimes we are on a burning oil platform. That's what the CEO, Stephen Elop of Nokia, had written about almost 12 years ago now. Okay, and therefore what we need to do is evolve and transform. Because growth presumes a dimension on which we are playing continuing forever. Evolution requires being open to the possibility of changing those dimensions. And transformation requires the modern term today is pivot, but transformation requires, okay, recasting ourselves in very, very different ways. And that is not always easy. So thank you for the time. And I don't know if I've added value or not, but at least this is how I tend to think about it. But my best wishes are that you find your pearl and you operate with patience, perseverance, ingenuity, resilience, iteration, okay, and then with discipline, mindfully as you make something out of this world. So that oyster is there, and there is your pearl. And I'll shut up now. I don't know if I overstayed or understayed my welcome, but I'll shut up.
This was perfect, Anirudh, by the way. I will not call Anirudh G, as you pointed out. Anirudh would be all right.
Now I feel 30 years younger.
No,
Yeah,
and
that
just
should be,
to
yeah, that should be.
clarify the reason why Weber and I add the G, it is more out of respect and love
I, I,
for your
I understand.
qualifications and achievements. So that G will be correlated with age.
I understand. It's my weakness, not yours. But once I'm called uncle, I'm in trouble. Okay, so there you go. Bachacha ji or something. Hey.
Okay, all right. So Venu, would you like to start with the questions?
Sure, absolutely, Weber. I think with a very meaningful introduction, I would say I call this an introduction because a lot of the questions that you have listed there are probably the ones that people more often than not do not even think about. And the reason I say this is it's great to have a formula for success because most of the times people ask, okay, what does it take to be a successful company? What does it take to build an enterprise? Having that formula gets you in the starting place, but asking the right questions gets you in the right direction to make that start. So I think that was very helpful to call out. Just one of the things that you were focusing on, the discipline aspect to build a compelling enterprise. Now, can we go back to that slide? Or I think I can
Sure.
still ask my question because I
You can,
do
you can,
remember.
you can. I'll go back.
So in that you had mentioned core strategy. So how does one as an entrepreneur, you know, decide if the strategy that I'm thinking of is a good enough strategy? Is it something that will excite the customers? Is it something that will be of commercial value? Because whenever we decide a product, as you said, we would find it a fantastic product or an amazing idea, but we really don't know what the other person's perspective or market view of the product may
Sure.
be.
Yeah. So I think we have to be careful about different things here. First of all, I didn't say decide on a strategy. There has to be clear self-awareness around the strategy. Okay.
Mhm.
So I think especially when you are a startup, you can have some ideas. And I know many startups, okay, with 10 years later at a very different place when they began. Okay. So I don't think you can decide. I think there is a certain emergence, and I think we need to be embracing the emergence of things as we discover, and openness to some doors closing, but some new windows opening. So that's one thing. Secondly, it's not about, there is no mention of a particular product here. The starting point here is a clear sense of how do I want to make a fundamental difference in my customer's business, if it's a B2B play, or in my customers' lives because I exist. And even that, you might start with one possible hypothesis and you do some experiments and you see something get traction and something don't. So there's some evolutionary and iterative nature. So you need to bring resilience and iteration to the dance, as said Gordon said. Okay. But over time, okay, an answer will emerge. It may not be the answer you began with or you wanted, but it's an answer that emerges. And now you have to see whether indeed is this an answer not only do I find acceptable, but is it an answer that I can embrace? And then work on it and refine it, and then become something very, very solid. Okay. But it begins with the raison d'etre. And I think many times I have a conversation with my students, I call them co-learners, but we talk over lunch, and they say, I have this idea and I have that idea. And I say, oh, yeah. Okay. But connect the dots for me. Idea is not the product. Okay. How does it solve a problem? And how does it solve the problem in a distinctively different way than anybody else might? Okay. don't just talk about the problem, but how will it change the customer in a fundamental way? So go back to that. And that, I think, can become a core which might emerge, but it's not tied to a specific product with some features, etc. So that, and then there is, if you will, an understanding. And I say product, I did not say product, comma, market. I said product slash market. Somehow. So what you need is an awareness of not just what we're offering, the problem we are solving, but for whom, and the markets in which we are playing. There needs to be some integrated answer across these. And then finally, you will discover over time, okay, and you will implement over time with intentionality how you are different. Okay, and I think Michael Porter, the strategy guru, had this article he once wrote in 1996. What is strategy? So to your point, so, but he says strategy is about what you do that is different, how you do it that is different. What you do that is different, and how you do it that is different. And I think there you can bring much more intentionality to bear. Okay, some self-awareness. Okay, so I have many fellow faculty at Babson and elsewhere, and we all often have the same course, quote unquote, and yet we have different games we play. And some of us are much more mindful than others of what we do that is different and how we do it that is different. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Ben.
No, got it, Professor. That's a very sort of valuable point, and I think it goes back to your earlier point that you reiterated, that asking the right questions is very important. So before you sort of evaluate the idea, asking whether that solves a problem, does it solve it, who does it solve it for, and asking whether it's is actually something that they would consider. All of those questions would probably help people in the right direction.
Yeah.
I see you have
Then one of the persons whose name I recognize, okay, and I'm not going to embarrass him by naming him in person here, but he introduced me many, many years ago to a book called The Little Prince. And I bet you he's smiling when I mention this right now, okay? But in The Little Prince, and I don't know if any of you heard of it or read it, okay, The Little Prince never lets go of a question. And I think the best and the most exciting entrepreneurs I've met in my life are those who don't let go of a question. There's a why, the why, the why, the third and the fourth layer. And then suddenly the eureka moment.
All right, let me take the question that we have from Mustafa. So he's
Yeah.
asking about deep market knowledge. So
Yes.
he's asking like how to understand or to find market knowledge.
Okay,
So,
good. So
yeah.
Mustafa, sorry, good. I'm sorry, Vaibhav.
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So Mustafa, first of all, one of the things I stress in class often is market is not just demand. Market has three facets we need to kind of be mindful of. Okay, we need market is the demand side for sure, but market is also the supply side. Supply side not in terms of your suppliers, but supply side in terms of others vying to solve the customer's problems. So the supply side might be competitors. The supply side might be complementors, because oftentimes you alone cannot solve a problem. You need complementary products or services. Complementary spelled not with an I, that's for free, but complementary spelled with an E. They work together like bread and butter, if you complementors, and then you have substitutors. So oftentimes there are other ways to solve the same problem. So there's a demand side, a supply side, and then there are the mechanisms in the market that bring supply and demand together. Regulators, policies, marketplace, etc. So Mustafa, I think when I say deep market knowledge, I'm stressing you need deep knowledge of the demand side, the supply side, and the rules governing the marketplace. Explicit perhaps, or perhaps implicit. Now, deep knowledge requires not just data, not just analysis, but I think Mustafa and maybe Vaibhav, use the word understanding. Okay, understanding is critical, but understanding requires some maturity of internalizing the data and the information. But more than anything else, understanding behavior, understanding motivations, understanding the game that is being played, And I think that understanding requires patience on our part, but also requires, if you will, what is often called in meditation, the beginner's mind. So without any biases and presumptions, and I think many of us approach markets with lots of presumptions. And I think that's something we have to learn how to make sure we never suffer from. Okay, so somehow being aware of our biases, parking them at the gate, and then just with some great neutrality, which is very difficult to do. Okay, just observe. But all three sides, the demand side, the supply side for problem solving, and then the implicit, not just explicit, but the implicit rules governing the conduct of, and the newer markets often don't have those. So one of the things that the last 2 weeks in class we have been focused on is the new Apple Vision Pro headsets, Pro Vision headsets. Well, that's a market for which the demand side, who knows, is still evolving. The supply side is also evolving, and the rules, I don't know what the rules are going to be over time. So unless I understand how this game is being played out. So Mustafa, am I getting the name right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a Shakespeare play, As You Like It, where it talks about all the words a stage, and men and women are merely actors. So I want to understand what the stage is, what the play is, and who the actors are, and what are the motivations, and how are they they're not always choreographed well. How do they play out over time? But thank you for the question, Mustafa.
Thanks, Anirudh. Venu, would you like to take the next question?
Yeah, I think we have we have a question from Kamal, who's asking for any specific examples on fish eye lens and periscope to understand it better.
Okay, Kamal, thank you for the question. So many years ago now, I saw a quote in The Economist, which has always stayed with me. You enrich yourself only by frequenting domains remote from your own. You enrich yourself only by frequenting domains remote from your own. So, Kamal, I think a good example of a fisheye lens is on a periscope is let's say, and I see you. So today I read a story, fascinating story in the newspaper about three young people, okay, competing and winning a prize for using artificial intelligence to decipher some scrolls, okay, from Roman times. Okay, scrolls that were in a villa in Italy, in a major volcanic eruption, almost got charred, and they cannot even be unfurled. So Kamal, first of all, somebody had to, I don't know, in IIT, we had electrical engineering, civil engineering, chemical engineering, et cetera, et cetera. And for the most part, we focus on our narrow little domains. Somebody said, wait a minute, maybe I can tie things together. So Kamal, I think a good example of fisheye lens is one of the three characters who won the prize. He's interested in AI. He's also interested in archaeology. Now, not that many people I know, okay, might be interested in two or three things with deep passion. So he brought those. So that's a fisheye lens. Somehow the interest in domains which are very different from you, not just related but orthogonally different. And then somehow have the depth, if you will, to tie these together. So without ever unrolling the scrolls, just think about it, doing scanning, using technology scanning, and thereby, in virtual sense, unrolling the scrolls, and then bring AI to bear to decipher the characters. So now he was the first person to decipher a complete sentence from 2,000 years ago. It just blows my mind how. So Kamal, I think the point here is fisheye lens allows you to see things outside your field of vision. It allows you to see peripheral things. Now, many of us are not good at seeing peripheral things. It requires curiosity and then a hard work required to work on the nerves, if you will, but also looking around corners, which is what a periscope does. So I think, come on, what I would say is, if you are intrigued by, nourished by, and delight in domains which are very different, That's a great starting point. So maybe a good example would be, once a month, have a breakfast or lunch or dinner with somebody who is from a completely different domain. They have the vocabulary you don't understand. You have vocabulary they don't understand. They have metaphors you use, they don't follow. They use metaphors you don't follow. It'll be very humbling. Okay, but with the right spirit, it can be truly, truly instrumental in developing the breadth of perspective and uncanny ability to look around corners. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Kamal.
Yeah. Thanks, Anirudh. So there is another question from Prakash. He's asking, is being an entrepreneur solely about solving problems, or does it also involve delivering existing solutions more efficiently? Additionally,
Sure.
what distinguishes building a business from building a startup?
So the first question, I don't think it's just about solving problems. There's a necessary and sufficient condition here. Okay, if you're not solving problems, you don't have anything to work with. That's a necessary condition. Okay, but sufficiency does not require being the first to solve a problem, but it requires essentially being distinctive and compelling in how a problem is solved. So maybe the problem is solved by others. There are many problems which have been solved by others, but they're boring. Oh, okay, maybe you bring a different way to solve the problem, and that's innovation comes in. So to me, that is a part of being entrepreneurial, innovative. Okay, solving a problem differently, distinctively. Now, I think the second part of the question was, does it about startups or existing businesses? Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I personally, this is just me, okay. I tend to shy away from the noun entrepreneur, and I gravitate toward the adjective entrepreneurial. I think we can all be entrepreneurial, whether it's a startup or an established enterprise. We can all be entrepreneurial, and it's all about starting with a mindset saying, where do I see some opportunities to change the game? And maybe it is a startup, but not all of us are necessarily, not all of us have the wherewithal, not all of us have the DNA to start things up. But many of us might be the enterprises that already exist. So fine. We can still be entrepreneurial in what we do. But the point here is to be effective. Okay. Don't just say the emperor has no clothes. You have to find solutions that are acceptable and that are distinctive enough and get traction so you can emerge into something useful.
Thanks, Anirudh. Venu, would you like to take the next question, please?
Sure. So the next question we have is from Debayan Chakravarti. And his question is, in the current era with emerging visible potential of AI and increasing competition in the field of data science and management, is there any opportunity for any of our business to introduce AI into data management tools? If so, what should be the starting point with reference to the current market scenario?
I can't answer the specifics of the question because I'm not that deeply intimately familiar with it. But I would like to say, no, yes, there are always opportunities. Okay, so I think the point here is, do you look at the world differently than others and see opportunities that others may not have seen? So my advice about don't take a photograph standing up, not my advice, but my photography instructors applies. So I think there are opportunities everywhere. The point here is, who sees them? How do you see them? I had a class recently on systems thinking. And there were 4 elements to this formula for system thinking that were talked about in the video I watched. One was about distinction. And I think, Devayan, one of the things we can often do is be much more discerning in looking at the world. Not all of us are equally discerning. And I think sometimes opportunities are seen by those who are more discerning than others. So that you draw the distinctions. Secondly, okay, he talked about systems, and I'm not going to go into that. Third, he talked about relationships. I'm not going to go into that. But fourth, he talked about perspectives. I think if you want to find opportunities in fields, you have to somehow role play different perspectives from the point of view of so and so, from the point of view of so and so, from the point of view of so and so. And sometimes by doing that, you can identify opportunities. So, Debayan, I might not be answering your question directly because that's maybe a separate conversation we can have one-on-one. But I think the point I'm going to offer to everybody is, be discerning, try out different perspectives, and maybe use an opportunity that others might have missed.
I think that's a lot of food for thought there, Professor. And I know this was a very specific question, but definitely I think when you sort of look at some of these questions, put them into a framework as well. Just after the session, if you just ponder over them, I think you'll be in a starting position on how do you enter or what should be your starting point. I think the key problem and the key sort of answer to both of it is asking the right questions and asking enough questions till you get to the starting point, I believe.
But
Is that
I'm
a
also,
advice,
and Devan,
Professor?
you can reach out to me. My email address is there, so you can reach out to me, and then we can have a specific conversation. I just don't want to go down a rabbit hole that may or may not appeal to everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That is wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I have one question. So I think I don't see any other questions. So normally I do ask this question specifically, if there's a speaker who is from a different, region. And the question is that, where do you see India moving? Or where do you see Indian entrepreneurial system or, Indian entrepreneurs per se moving? And where do you see the future of, India per se?
If I knew the answer to the question, I would not be doing this session. I would be making millions somewhere else. Okay.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, great.
So I think there's a difference between what I think I think India might be going, as opposed to where I hope India could be going.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to go into all the distinctions necessary here. Okay, I think personally, what is exciting for me is that in some sense there's been a major inflection point in India.
Mhm.
When I was going through IIT, etc., most people wanted jobs in companies. And that was it. Okay. And I think today it's a very different scene in that regard. And that is a huge shift. It's an inflection point in the DNA. So I think there's a lot of bubbling of energy. But many of you are too young to have heard of an author who is now passed away by the name of Milan Kundera, who wrote a book called Unbearable Lightness of Being. A few years ago, I wrote a paper titled The Unbearable Heaviness of Entrepreneurial Being. Okay, I think the energy exists, the bubbling exists. The question is the direction it takes. Okay, a few years ago, I was concerned that a lot of the energy of entrepreneurial activity was around developing apps, and apps. And I said to myself, how many apps can people buy? We still need things, real atoms and molecules, etc. So I think we need the right mix. Maybe that is emerging in India as we speak, because 1.5 billion people, that's a lot. Okay. And all the experiments that conducted there will create all kinds of amazing things. So I think for me, the hopeful stuff in India is the emergence, if you will, of the right portfolio of entrepreneurial activity. Not necessarily just to make the first the second or third unicorn. That's fine. I have nothing against that. But I think there are also people I've spoken with who want to solve problems, significant problems. Okay. And that's why I go back to perseverance and ingenuity. I think India has some significant, big problems that need to be solved. And I think if entrepreneurship can somehow align with itself, okay, so there's a vector here, entrepreneurial vector. So if you think about India and the entrepreneurial vector, I would love to see not as a scalar, but the different dimensions and how they, if you will, align themselves or otherwise with hopefully creating an India, okay, which the next generation truly deserve and can work with. I hope I'm giving a politically correct enough answer, but still an answer nevertheless.
No, thanks a lot, Anirudh. Actually, that's one thing which I normally, in fact, I am also a teacher. So normally I'm very critical about what I speak, and I make it to the point rather than being either bullish or bearish about whatever questions is being asked. So if possibly if there would have been a policymaker from the government of India policy, that person would be a lot more bullish about his or her answer as compared to for example someone who can be a lot more critical about it, or who can be a lot more research oriented about it. And that's really nice of you, or as a teacher in general, because we can actually do that. Yeah, really cool.
Given where I am in life, okay, which is 50 years after graduation, my hope it is that today's entrepreneurs will set their minds on wading through the difficulty. So this video, this podcast I heard about the Perseverance helicopter, the little helicopter that could, it ended with a comment which is following: space is hard, politics is hard. Okay, and yet you got Perseverance out there, and the helicopter that could. I think everywhere, not just India, everywhere, the problems are hard, the politics are hard. And if you can somehow navigate them correctly, so you solve some of the big problems, that will create an India which, not the next generation, the generation after that, would find nourishing. That to me is the ultimate responsibility that we have. But on the way, you can be a unicorn. Okay, fine. I understand.
Thanks a lot, Anirudh. And another follow-up question, which normally I do ask as well, and because I don't see any other questions, so I'll just go ahead with it. Venu, do you have any other questions in your mind? Otherwise, I will go ahead.
No, go for it, Vaibhav, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So, for example, obviously, you are a faculty at, you are a faculty on Babson, and Babson is there as well. So, do you think you, or Babson in general, can help IITB entrepreneurs? Let's say if they want to grow in the US, or in American markets, or what is that? How can that connection be built, basically?
Okay, so I cannot speak on behalf of Babson.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I can speak on behalf of myself.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Simple. Yes. Now, I think how we can help, it's a matter of, it's a dance where two people have to hold hands and go on a dance. Okay. So we have to discover how we help. But I didn't start my own enterprise, but I have an experience talking to people and seeing. So I have the benefit of time that many of the younger people may not have had. Okay. But I care deeply about all of you and helping you leave a better balance sheet for the world. So I'd be glad to help. And I don't mean balance sheet in economic terms alone, but also social terms. So yes, Babson, I think Babson's focus right now is in what they call entrepreneurial leadership. Okay, to create value, not just economic value, but also social value and community value. So in that sense, I'm sure Babson also would like to help, but I cannot speak on behalf of Babson.
All right. All right. No, that's great. Thanks, Anirudh. Actually, what happens is, for example, I also invited on the speakers, director of entrepreneurship center at Erasmus University, and a lot of colleagues reach out to me that, let's say, they want to take their startups in the new Dutch market or European market. Can that person be of some help? So I thought, anyways, if somebody wants to reach out, your email ID is there, and maybe they can write an email to you, and you can take forward the conversation from there. I think as simple as that. Yeah, because a lot of ITB entrepreneurs per se, they want to expand into US markets, and to and fro is there, basically. Yeah, so that could be really helpful. Yeah.
And I would stress again that the word growth should not be used only alone. There is growth, there is evolution, there is transformation. And I think as an entrepreneur over the next 10, 20 years, maybe you have to think much harder about evolution and transformation and not just about growth. If nothing else, the 3 years of COVID taught me, and that for an engineer, it was very humbling. Okay. Most of us engineers, we often react to the word and say, that doesn't make sense. Okay. And I think what COVID taught me is I have to stop asking, so stop saying to myself, it doesn't make sense. I have to start asking, how do I learn to make sense of this? That's a very different thing. So I think it's not just about growth, it's about evolution and transformation, which is what might be required given the VUCA world in which we operate.
Yeah, very true, Anirudh. Yeah, thanks for that. Venu, would you like to take any more questions, or Sona, you have any questions in your mind?
No, I think this was a very good session, so we can probably end it here and probably
Yeah,
give 10 minutes back to the group.
yeah. I don't see any questions from the audience as well. So I think, yeah. All right, Venu. So maybe you can, you can say your final words, and then I'll say my final thanks as well to Anirudh. So please go ahead.
Sure, sure, Alok. So I think, Anirudh, this was a very exhilarating session, and I think very aptly the topic of making the world your oyster resonates even with what you had suggested, right? Like finding the right pearl. Definitely something that I think people should think of, and the right way to think about it. Covering all of that in a session, I think is very challenging, as well as it is interesting from a people perspective, because when they start thinking about the right things, finding the answers to them, I think that journey of why till you have your aha moment is sort of what the right way of getting into entrepreneurship should be. And I think just going through some of the key highlights that I personally was very inspired by was the fact that the entrepreneurship possibility is fragile, but fragile doesn't mean impossible. So I think that was sort of the first thing that I definitely, I sort of was looking at it and I was very inspired by. The second thing that I want to really, call out for this was that possibility looms around every corner. And the fact that a person sort of just needs to change the perspective, that is, don't take every photograph standing up, is something that is a very good idea that the advice that somebody had given you, which I think you've shared with this group, which people will now sort of maybe credit you for directly instead now. But yeah, I think that's a good thing. And then the idea of having that resilience baked in, I think a lot of people do always have that, I need to be fearless, I need to be daring, I need to be bold. But the thing is, when you're finding the right pearl, you also need to have the right degree of fear, which is something that I definitely felt is a very practical advice, a good takeaway from the session personally. So thank you very much for these words of wisdom. And I'm sure people will reach out to you. And if we ever have a chance to meet in person, either when you come back to India or if, say, either of us or any of us is in the US or visiting Babson, we should definitely go through a longer session, because I think all of what you've shared in an hour can sort of be looked at in a great depth, spanning across days. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I think final words from me. Thanks a lot, Anirudh, for your time. It was really wonderful to actually, meet you in person and online, obviously, but also to hear from you. I was always kind of, your profile is fantastic, and that's the reason a lot of us joined. And it was great to actually hear those fantastic wisdom that you had shared. It was actual gyan that that's this kind of event or this kind of initiative is kind of we started with, and it's a fantastic start to 2024 for the entrepreneurship GAN. And thanks a lot for your time. And there are other synergies, obviously. I would love to explore. ITB would love to explore. Obviously, one is mentorship, which you can offer, and maybe some of our entrepreneurs would directly write to you, as I already pointed out. But also apart from that, there are some executive programs that we do. If you have time somewhere in the near future, I would still love to be in touch with you, and hopefully you can share some of those GAN maybe in a broader 10 or 15 hours course to our students at ITB and alumni as well. And that would be fantastic. But again, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot really for your time. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you. And I wish you the very best at whatever you do. Okay. And hopefully you achieve good for the world as well. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we are totally in time. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye, everybody.